Both the Airbus A380 and Boeing 747 are not produced anymore, but the demand for large wide-body aircraft, it's still very much there. Emirates will fly A380s into the 2040s. Lufthansa dragged its A380s out of the desert. British Airways, Qantas, Korean Air all brought back the superjumbos everyone said were finished. And right now, behind closed doors, 3 radically different aircraft are being studied. A stretch 777-10, a longer A350 called the A350-2000, and maybe, just maybe, a €20 billion A380neo fantasy that Emirates is trying to resurrect. Kind of. We'll get onto it. The thing is, on paper, the industry should already have its next super jumbo. In reality, no manufacturer has committed, no program has launched, and the world's biggest airlines are beginning to run out of time. So, what is actually going to happen? You see, the thing is, the super jumbo was supposed to be obsolete, inefficient, a relic of the hub and spoke model thinking. But airports didn't really get that memo. Slot constraints are just getting worse and not better. London Heathrow operates at around 80 to 85 slots per hour during peaks, completely maxed out under its annual cap of 480,000 movements. Paris Charles de Gaulle handles up to 110 slots during peak waves. Frankfurt's limited to 104 movements in peaks. Munich, Zurich, Amsterdam, they are all capped. At these airports, you can't just add new flights when demand grows. There's physically no room. Asian hubs are also facing the same squeeze, so airlines have one option: put more seats on each departure. And here is the problem: global travel demand continues to rise. Middle Eastern hubs are growing the fastest. Emirates, Qatar Airways and Turkish Airlines are betting heavily on high-density connecting traffic. India is accelerating towards a second largest market status, and China is returning to growth after reopening. Europe has already exceeded 2019 traffic levels as well. Now, consider this. Nearly 1,000 aircraft are entering their retirement window in the 2030s and 2040s. The 777-300ER fleet alone, the backbone of long-haul flying for basically 2 decades, represents hundreds of aircraft needing successors. Globally, 251 A380s were built and 833 777-300ERs were delivered. Most of these 1,000 plus aircraft will hit retirement age in the coming decades. The industry is about to retire hundreds, literally hundreds, of 350 to 550 seat jets. And right now, on the higher end, nothing really in production truly replaces them. The 777-9 seats around 400 passengers, and the A350-1000 can seat up to 410. Both, of course, are excellent aircraft, but they're still not 500-seat jets. They don't solve the slot problem, they simply don't replace an Airbus A380. Even then, the 777-9 is still not certified, not this year, maybe next year, maybe 2028, who knows. If Boeing doesn't experience any more delays. Let's see. Which is why airlines are driving this entire conversation forward. At the 2025 Dubai Air Show, Emirates made a big move. They ordered 65 more 777-9s, but they publicly said they would support Boeing's study for something bigger, the 777-10. But here's what makes it pretty interesting. Emirates made sure they could convert those last 777-9 orders into the 777-10 if it actually gets built. Tim Clark, president of Emirates, has always been clear about his vision. Dubai's hub model demands maximum passengers per slot. The A380 delivers that with around 500 seats, but the A380 burns fuel like it's nothing. You see, Clark has actually been pitching Airbus on an A380neo with composite wings, a lighter structure, and Rolls-Royce Ultrafan engines. This blueprint promises 20 to 25% improvement in fuel burn. Airbus's response at the time: if you give us 20 billion euros, we'll build it. The translation: impossible unless someone pays for development. So Clark's fallback position is the 777-10. Which doesn't exist yet. 65 of these 777-9s that are on order will have conversion rights, meaning Emirates is really hedging its bet. They want 500 seats. They'll take 460 to 480 seats if that's what Boeing delivers, because the alternative is flying A380s until they literally cannot fly anymore. British Airways tells a different story. They reactivated all 12 A380s post-pandemic for flights to Los Angeles, Johannesburg, Boston, Washington, I think Miami as well. Not because they wanted to, because it had to. Heathrow operates at maximum capacity. British Airways can't add more departures. Upgauging is the only growth option. They will need eventually a new aircraft that has 460 to 480 seats, and it does not care if it has 4 engines or 2. The 777-10 works, and also a stretched A350 and A350-2000 would also work. Whichever gets built first, British Airways will probably order it. It is not romantic about the A380. British Airways is a prisoner of Heathrow's slot constraints. Qatar Airways represents the efficiency maximizer. Doha's hub is growing, and they're eyeing ultra long-haul routes. Think Project Sunrise style flights, but without the public fanfare. Its current A350-1000 fleet proves Airbus's loyalty, despite the paint issues and the lawsuits. But the thing is, an A350-2000 that matches a 777-10 capacity without sacrificing range, it's a much harder engineering problem than it sounds. Stretching the A350-1000 by 9 to 10 meters gets you 430 to 450 seats. But you sacrifice range unless you add fuel capacity, which will add weight, and it will also cut the efficiency. Carriers literally want the impossible. A350 economics with 777-10 capacity and A350-1000 range. If Airbus can deliver on that, many airlines, including Qatar Airways, will order. If not, I think a lot of airlines will wait. Korean Air reactivated A380s for Seoul to North America trunk routes. The Asiana merger creates a capacity crunch at its Seoul hub. They need something big, and they need it pretty soon. The 777-10 will probably make most sense for them. It replaces A380 capacity at roughly 70% of the operating cost. Korean Air also already operates the 777 family, and fleet commonality does matter. You see, fleet planning is all about maintenance, infrastructure, pilot training, and parts inventory. The 777-10 slots into its existing operation. Then we have Turkish Airlines, the stealth contender. Istanbul's hub ambitions rival Dubai and Doha. Their current A350-1000 orders prove wide-body appetite, but they likely do need a 450-seat aircraft for Europe-Asia connecting traffic. High-density, medium-haul missions where twin-jet economics shine. Turkish could swing the entire market if they commit to either the 777-10 or A350-2000, because right now, both manufacturers are very much waiting for someone to blink. 5 airlines, 3 different aircraft concepts, but only 2 are actually possible. Boeing's 777-10 is probably going to be the frontrunner. It's a stretch of the 777-9 by roughly 3 meters. Theoretical capacity sits at 450 to 500 seats in a 2-class configuration. The GEX-9 engines provide enough thrust, if certified, for higher maximum takeoff weight. But stretching a twin jet to 500 seats creates real challenges. Consider takeoff performance with one engine out. If one engine fails during takeoff with 500 people on board, you need enough thrust and control authority to keep climbing safely. That's harder with a longer, heavier airframe. And then there's tail strike margins. The longer the fuselage, the easier it is to scrape the tail during rotation. Boeing designed an electronic system for the 777X, but could the 777-10 push those limits even further? Who knows? Such a long twin jet at that weight demands long runways and good conditions. It's very much a big hub aeroplane. And then there's also the range question. Adding length means a heavier airframe, which means reduced range, and compared to the 777-9, the 777-10 wouldn't have enough range for ultra long haul routes, but it would have more than sufficient capability for the world's busiest trunk routes. Think Dubai to London, Seoul to Los Angeles, Singapore to Frankfurt. Those missions don't require ultra long haul range, they just require high capacity. Now the seat math, and this is absolutely critical. A typical Emirates A380 seats around 500 passengers. A 777-10 could seat around 460 to 480 in 2 class, or over 500 in a super high density configuration. For Emirates, that's potentially 20 to 40 fewer seats per aircraft compared to the A380, maybe even more. To match a capacity of 40 A380s, roughly 20,000 seats, you'd need around 42 to 48 777-10s. To replace 68 A380s, you would need even more. You're not getting a like-for-like replacement. You're getting pretty close, and because twin jets burn less fuel per seat and need similar maintenance infrastructure, the economics do work. And the 777-10 is most likely to be built because Emirates has explicitly requested it, and Boeing has a partner to study it. The catch, however, the 777-9 hasn't entered service. Boeing has a certification backlog that includes the 737 MAX 7, MAX 10, and the entire 777X family. Boeing's cash reserves are not infinite, and launching another development program right now would be a gamble that it can't really afford. And while Boeing grabs headlines with a proposed 777-10, Airbus could be quietly studying something just as ambitious, as mentioned before, the A350-2000. A stretch could lengthen the A350-1000 fuselage. An estimated capacity sits at 430 to 450 seats, efficient than a 777-10 on shorter routes thanks to the lighter A350 platform. And because the A350-1000 is already certified, an A350-2000 could enter service faster, and that will have a much less risky certification path. Airbus CEO confirmed to Aviation Week at the 2025 Dubai Air Show that multiple airlines are asking for it. His exact words, "People pretty much everywhere are talking to us about it." The strategic purpose is clear. The A350-2000 directly counters the 777-9 and 777-10. It also replaces 777-300ERs for airlines tired of waiting for 777X certification. It gives Airbus dominance in the high-capacity twin-jet market. Where would it thrive? Think Europe to the US East Coast, Middle East to Asia, dense transcontinental Asia routes, India to Europe, pretty much anywhere where widebodies will fly. But Airbus hasn't launched it yet. Why? Because it wants major airlines as anchor customers. And it's wary of overreacting to Emirates' demands after the A380 experience taught expensive lessons about niche aircraft. Airbus CEO admitted that Airbus isn't fundamentally resource constrained, but it needs to plan engineering resources very carefully. The translation? We can build it, we just need the business case first. And that business case does hinge quite a lot on Emirates. Tim Clark is playing both sides, pushing Boeing for the 777-10, while constantly talking to Airbus CEO about the A350-2000. But Clark's made one thing clear: the A350-2000 needs a more powerful engine. Airbus insists the current Trent XWB-97 can handle it with minor upgrades, but Clark wants more thrust for Middle East hot and high operations, which would force Rolls-Royce into a semi-new engine variant, and it could slow everything down. So, if the A380neo is fantasy, why should manufacturers bother with any super jumbo? Because airlines keep proving the demand never disappeared. Post-pandemic A380 reactivations told the whole story. As mentioned, Lufthansa brought back 8, British Airways reactivated all 12, Qantas pulled all of its planes out of storage, Korean Air, ANA and Etihad all brought back A380s. Emirates is flying over 90 and plans to expand its active A380 fleet to 110 by late 2026, with repair capabilities keeping them flying into the late 2030s or early 2040s. These were not nostalgic decisions, they were economic necessities, not because of demand, but also because of delivery delays of A350s and 777Xs. Most reactivated A380s are flying peak trunk routes, exactly the missions a future 450 to 500 seat twin jet would take over. British Airways runs A380s to cities like Los Angeles, Johannesburg, Boston and other destinations because it can't add more Heathrow departures. Routes that might not need 469 seats per flight, but slot constraints force upgauging. Lufthansa can't expand from Munich, A380s handle high demand transatlantic runs and other routes. Singapore Airlines flies A380s to Frankfurt, London and Sydney airports with limited capacity that facilitate A380 operations. Network evolution is intensifying this need. Gulf carriers and Turkish Airlines rely heavily on high density hub operations. Ultra long haul routes are growing. Peak travel patterns from India, China, and Southeast Asia are exploding. Big aircraft are transforming from optional to necessary. Overall, industry consensus is taking shape. Twin engine, 450 to 500 seats, one deck with an ultra-long fuselage design, larger GE9X or Rolls-Royce engines, composite heavy construction, intended to directly replace 777-300ER fleets and partially replace A380 capacity. But there's a real wild card. Both manufacturers could simply decide the risk isn't worth it. And here's the real reality of it all. A 777-10 doesn't perfectly replace an A380. You know, it gets pretty close, but you need more aircraft to move the same number of passengers. And that might actually be fine, because the real successor to the A380 was never going to be another double-decker. It was always going to be a twin jet that could deliver 80 to 90% of the capacity at 70% of the operating costs. With Chinese and Indian growth factored in, the total addressable market over 20 years is probably 250 to 350 aircraft. Not massive, but viable. The question is which manufacturer will move first and whether one of these jets will actually get built, and that will decide what the future of long-haul flying actually looks like for the next, 20 to 40 years. Really, what happens next will depend on who blinks first. So if you enjoyed this video, please do leave a comment below and be sure to subscribe to this channel, because as you've probably noticed, it's pretty new. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it.